Fighting next to humans, I felt fear in a way I never had before. Part 1. The Alliance forms. Commander Eth stood at the observation window of the Coalition command station and watched the human ships arrive. They were small vessels, ugly things compared to the elegant warships of his own people. He crossed both sets of arms over his chest and let out a low rumble of displeasure. "They are here," said his second officer, a young named the humans. "I can see that," Eth replied. His voice was cold. They were the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. They had 4 arms, each one strong enough to crush metal. Their bodies were covered in natural armor, thick plates of chitin that could stop most weapons. They had fought wars for 3,000 years and never lost. Not once. Their empire stretched across 100 worlds, and every species knew to fear them. Eth had killed his first enemy at the age of 12. He had led armies. He had conquered planets. He did not understand fear because he had never needed to. And now the Coalition wanted him to fight beside humans. He had studied the reports on humanity. They came from a planet called Earth, a dangerous world full of predators and natural disasters. The humans had survived there, which was impressive. But the humans themselves were not impressive at all. They had no armor. They had no claws. Their senses were weak. They grew tired easily. They lived short lives. A wound that it would ignore could kill a human in minutes. They were soft, fragile, breakable. The door behind him opened. An admiral walked in. The old was missing one of his arms, lost in a battle decades ago. He was the commander of all Coalition forces in this sector. "Eth," the admiral said, "the human delegation has arrived. You will meet them in the war room." "I do not want humans in my battalion," Eth said. "They will slow us down. They will die, and we will have to protect them instead of fighting the enemy." "The decision has been made," Admiral replied. His tone left no room for argument. "The Harrow are killing us. They have destroyed 12 worlds in the last cycle. We need every ally we can get, even the humans." Eth wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. The Harrow Collective was unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They were machines, billions of them, controlled by a single vast intelligence. They did not get tired. They did not feel pain. They learned from every battle and adapted. Species that had stood against them for generations had been wiped out in months. Even though we're struggling. "Fine," Eth said. "I will meet them, but I will not be responsible for their deaths." The war room was a large circular chamber filled with holographic displays showing the current state of the war. It was not a pleasant sight. Red markers covered the map, each one representing a Harrow victory. The enemy was spreading like a disease. Eth arrived to find the human delegation already waiting. There were 5 of them, all wearing simple gray uniforms. They were so small compared to, barely reaching Eth's chest. Their skin was soft and exposed. He could see the blood moving beneath it, the fragile veins that carried their life. One of them stepped forward. It was a female, with dark hair cut short and eyes the color of deep water. She looked up at Eth without any sign of fear or nervousness. That surprised him. "Commander Eth," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "I am Lieutenant. I will be leading the human forces assigned to your battalion." Eth looked down at her. She was so small, he could break her with one hand. "Lieutenant," he said, "I will be direct with you. I did not ask for human soldiers. I do not believe you will survive what is coming. The Harrow are not like any enemy you have faced before." He expected her to be offended. He expected anger or fear or at least some reaction. Instead, she simply smiled. It was a strange expression, one he did not understand. There was something in it that made him uncomfortable, though he could not say why. "I appreciate your honesty, Commander," she said. "And I will be direct with you as well. My soldiers and I have been fighting the Harrow for 2 years. We have lost friends. We have lost family. We know exactly what we are facing." She paused, and her smile grew wider. "We are looking forward to it." Eth did not know what to say to that. looking forward to fighting the Harrow. That was not courage, that was madness. "The assault on Meridian 7 begins in 3 days," he said finally. "Your forces will remain in reserve. You will provide support only. You will not engage the enemy directly unless I give the order. Is that understood?" "Understood, Commander," replied, but that smile never left her face. Over the next 3 days, Eth watched the humans prepare. They trained constantly, running drills and checking their equipment. They moved differently than warriors. There was no elegance to their movements, no natural grace. Everything they did seemed like effort. But they never stopped. He watched a human soldier run the same training course 15 times in a row, pushing himself until he collapsed from exhaustion. Other humans carried him away, gave him water, and then he got up and did it again. He watched their medics practice treating wounds, working with a speed and focus that surprised him. They had special tools and medicines designed to keep their fragile bodies alive just a little longer. He watched Lieutenant sit alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. He could not read her expression. Her face showed nothing. "What do you think of them?" I asked him one evening. "They are strange," Eth admitted. "They know they are weak. They know they will die easily, and yet they do not seem to care. Perhaps they are too stupid to understand the danger." "No," Eth said slowly, "I do not think that is it." He remembered smile, that strange expression that had made him so uncomfortable. He was starting to understand what it meant. It was not happiness, it was not confidence. It was something else entirely, something he had no name for. In 3 days they would land on Meridian 7. In 3 days they would face the Harrow together. Eth told himself he was ready. He had fought 1,000 battles. He had never known defeat. But somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he did not want to examine too closely, something felt different. Something felt wrong. He pushed the feeling away and went to prepare for war. Fighting next to humans, I felt fear in a way I never had before. Part 2: First Contact with the Enemy. The shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Meridian 7. Eth gripped the restraints and looked at his warriors. They sat in perfect rows, their faces calm, their weapons ready. 300 soldiers, the finest in the coalition. They had never lost a battle. Across the ship, separated by a thin wall, were the humans. He could hear them talking to each other, making jokes, laughing before a battle against the Harrow. He did not understand them at all. The ship landed hard in a jungle clearing. The doors opened and humid air rushed in. Meridian 7 was a green world, covered in thick forests and deep swamps. Somewhere in those trees, the Harrow were waiting. "Move out," Eth commanded. "Standard formation, humans stay in the rear." Lieutenant nodded and ordered her soldiers to fall back. She did not argue, did not complain, but that smile was still on her face. They advanced through the jungle. They moved like shadows, their 4 arms pushing aside branches and vines. Their sensors scanned the area, looking for any sign of the enemy. For an hour, they found nothing. Then raised a hand. "Contact 50 meters ahead." Eth saw them through the trees. Harrow soldiers, dozens of them. They were horrible things to look at, machines built from stolen metal and stolen flesh. They had arms and legs like insects, and their bodies were covered in weapons. Their eyes glowed red in the shadows. "Attack," Eth ordered. They charged. They crashed into the Harrow line with the force of a storm. Eth fired his plasma rifle with 2 hands while swinging his blade with the other 2. A Harrow soldier leaped at him, and he cut it in half with a single strike. Its body fell in 2 pieces, sparking and twitching. This was what he lived for. This was what he was made for. The battle was fierce but short. They pushed forward, destroying every Harrow they found. Eth felt the familiar excitement of combat, the joy of facing an enemy and winning. The humans stayed in the back, barely firing their weapons. They were not needed. "Too easy. said as they stood among the destroyed machines. The Harrow are supposed to be stronger than this. Eth nodded slowly. Something felt wrong. The Harrow he had studied were smart, adaptive. This attack had been too simple, too direct. Then the ground exploded. Tunnels opened everywhere, hidden passages that the sensors had not detected. Harrow soldiers poured out like water from a broken dam. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Trap, Eth shouted. Form defensive positions. But it was too late. The Harrow were everywhere, surrounding them from all sides. Warriors fell as the machines swarmed over them. Eth saw it go down, 3 Harrow tearing at his armor. He fought his way toward his second officer, cutting down enemies with every step, but more kept coming. For the first time in his career, Eth considered retreat. They were outnumbered 5-1, maybe more. Even could not survive these odds. Then he heard the sound. It was a roar, a human battle cry, raw and savage. Lieutenant's company charged out of the trees, running directly at the thickest concentration of Harrow. They were not trying to flank the enemy or find weak points. They were attacking head-on, straight into death. "What are they doing?" Eth whispered. He watched a human soldier take a blast to the chest that knocked him backward. The man hit a tree, fell to the ground, and then stood up. His armor was burning. Blood poured from his mouth. He raised his weapon and kept firing. A female soldier lost her arm to a Harrow blade. She screamed, a sound of pure pain, and then picked up her fallen rifle with her remaining hand. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked forward, still shooting, still screaming. Herself was in the middle of it all. She moved through the Harrow like a dancer, ducking and weaving, firing her weapon in short bursts. A machine grabbed her leg, and she turned and shot it point-blank in what passed for its face. Then she kept moving, kept fighting. A human medic ran past Eth, completely ignoring the battle around him. He grabbed a wounded warrior, a soldier twice his size, and started dragging him toward cover. A Harrow shot him in the shoulder. He stumbled, gritted his teeth, and kept pulling the wounded soldier. He saved 3 before he finally collapsed. Eth had never seen anything like it. The humans were dying. They were being torn apart. But they would not stop. They would not retreat. Every one of them fought as if they had already accepted death and decided it did not matter. And the Harrow were confused. Eth could see it in the way they moved, the slight hesitation in their attacks. The machines were smart. They calculated odds, predicted behavior, planned responses. But they could not predict enemies who refused to act rationally. They could not understand creatures who charged into certain death and kept fighting anyway. The Harrow line broke. It was not a retreat, exactly. Machines did not feel fear, but their formation fell apart as they tried to deal with enemies that did not behave the way enemies were supposed to behave. And in that moment of confusion, the struck. Eth his warriors, and they pushed forward together with the humans. Side by side, 4-armed giants and small, fragile creatures, they drove the Harrow back. The battle lasted another hour, brutal and bloody, but when it ended, the coalition forces still held the field. Eth stood in the aftermath, breathing hard. Around him, the jungle was destroyed. Trees had been knocked down, the ground was torn up, and the bodies of Harrow soldiers lay everywhere. Mixed among them were Inhumans lying still. Lieutenant walked toward him. She was covered in blood, most of it not her own. There was a cut on her face and burns on her arms. She was limping badly. But she was smiling. "Good fight, Commander," she said. Eth looked at her. He looked at the human soldiers behind her, the ones who had survived. They were wounded, exhausted, barely standing. They had lost nearly half their company. They were still smiling. Something cold moved through Eth's chest. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was something else, something he could not name. "You should have retreated," he said. "You were outnumbered. You should have pulled back." Shook her head. "That is not what we do, Commander." "Then what do you do?" She looked at the battlefield, at the dead and the dying at the cost of their victory. Her smile faded just for a moment, and Eth saw something else in her eyes, something deep and dark. "We fight," she said quietly, "until we cannot fight anymore." She turned and walked away to help her wounded soldiers. Eth watched her go. The cold feeling in his chest grew stronger. He was beginning to understand what it was. He was beginning to be afraid. Fighting next to humans, I felt fear in a way I never had before. Part 3. The Nature of Human Fear. Night fell on Meridian 7. The jungle became dark and quiet, filled only with the sounds of strange insects and distant animals. The coalition forces had set up a temporary camp near the battlefield. Medical tents glowed with soft light as doctors worked on the wounded. Eth could not sleep. He walked through the camp, past rows of injured soldiers, past piles of captured Harrow equipment. His mind kept returning to the battle, to the things he had seen. The way the humans had charged into death. The way they had kept fighting when they should have fallen. He found Lieutenant outside the medical tent. She was sitting on a fallen tree, alone in the darkness. Her hands were shaking as she tried to light a small white stick, something humans called a cigarette. Her face was different now. The smile was gone. Her eyes were distant and wet, staring at nothing. Eth approached slowly. He did not know what to say. Among the warriors did not speak of their feelings after battle. They celebrated victory or they mourned defeat. There was nothing in between. "Lieutenant," he said. She looked up at him. For a moment she seemed surprised, like she had forgotten where she was. Then she nodded and returned to trying to light her cigarette. Her hands would not stop shaking. "Commander," she said, her voice was rough, tired, "can't sleep either." "No," he stood there awkwardly, his forearms hanging at his sides. "I wanted to speak with you, about today." "What about today?" "Your soldiers fought well," he said. "Better than I expected, you showed no fear." Laughed. It was not the same laugh he had heard before the battle. This one was broken, hollow. It sounded like it hurt. "No fear," she repeated. "Commander, I was terrified, we all were." Eth did not understand. "But you attacked. You ran toward the enemy, not away. That is not what afraid creatures do." Finally got her cigarette lit. She took a long breath and let the smoke out slowly. Her hands were still trembling. "That's exactly what afraid creatures do," she said. "At least human ones." She looked up at him and Eth saw the truth in her eyes. He saw the exhaustion, the pain, the weight of every soldier she had lost. He saw something he had never seen in a warrior. He saw the cost of courage. "Your people don't feel fear, do you?" asked. "I've read about you are supposed to be fearless. Your brains don't work the same way ours do." "That is correct," Eth said. "Fear is a weakness. It makes warriors hesitate. It makes them slow. They evolved without it so we could be better fighters." "Maybe," said softly. "Or maybe you lost something important." She stood up and walked a few steps away, looking up at the stars. Eth could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was trying not to break. "You want to know why we charged today? Why we ran into certain death and kept fighting?" "Yes." "Because we were afraid." She turned to face him. "Commander, humans feel everything. When we go into battle, we know we might die. Not in an abstract way, not as a calculation. We feel it in our bones, in our blood. We see our own death coming and every part of us screams to run away." "Then why do you not run?" "Because fear is not the same as weakness." His voice grew stronger. "We feel the terror. We feel the certainty that this is the end. And then we choose to act anyway, not because we don't feel it, but because we refuse to let it control us." She stepped closer to him. Despite being so much smaller, she seemed larger somehow. There was a fire in her eyes that Eth had not seen before. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Commander. Bravery is being afraid and fighting anyway. It is looking at death and saying, 'Not today.' It is feeling your heart pound so hard you think it will explode and still taking one more step forward." Eth was silent. He thought about his own warriors, the way they faced battle with calm confidence. They did not hesitate because there was nothing to hesitate about. Fighting was simply what they did. But was that truly courage, or was it just absence? Today I lost 47 soldiers, continued. Her voice cracked. 47 people I knew, people with families, with dreams, with lives they wanted to live. Every single one of them was afraid when they died. I could see it in their eyes. Tears were running down her face now, but she did not look away from Eth. And every single one of them kept fighting, not because they were not scared, because they loved the person next to them more than they feared death, because they knew that if they ran, someone else would have to take their place. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. That is what fear does to humans, Commander. It does not make us weak. It makes us choose. And when we choose to fight anyway, when we turn our terror into fuel, there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop us. Eth stood in silence for a long time. He thought about the battle, about the human soldier who kept firing with a hole in his chest, about the woman who lost her arm and walked toward the enemy instead of away, about the medic who saved 3 lives while bleeding from his own wounds. They had all been afraid. Every moment, every second, they had felt the cold hand of death reaching for them. And they had fought anyway. I think I understand, Eth said slowly. Among my people there is no choice. We fight because we cannot do anything else. But your people, you choose to fight, every time, even when you could run. Yes, said, every single time. That is, he searched for the right word, that is stronger than anything I have ever known. Smiled a small tired smile that did not reach her eyes. It doesn't feel strong. Right now it just feels heavy. She sat back down on the log and put her head in her hands. Her shoulders started to shake with silent sobs. All the pain she had been holding back finally broke through. Eth did not know what to do, did not comfort each other this way. But he remembered what she had said about humans, about how they felt everything. He sat down next to her. He did not speak. He simply stayed there present as she cried for her fallen soldiers. After a long time, looked up at him. Her eyes were red, her face was wet, but she seemed calmer. Thank you, she said. For what? For staying. Eth nodded. He looked out at the dark jungle, at the world they had come to save. Tomorrow we continue the mission, he said. Will you be ready? Stood up, she squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. The tears were still drying on her face, but her eyes were hard again. Commander, she said, I am always afraid, and I am always ready. She walked back toward her soldiers, leaving Eth alone in the darkness. He stayed there for a long time, thinking about fear, thinking about courage, thinking about the strange, fragile, unbreakable creatures called humans. And for the first time in his life, Commander Eth felt something cold and sharp growing in his chest, something that made his heart beat faster and his mind race with thoughts of death. He was learning to feel fear, and he was not sure if that made him weaker or stronger. Fighting next to humans, I felt fear in a way I never had before. Part 4, The Sea. 3 weeks passed on Meridian 7, 3 weeks of blood and fire and death. Firebase Omega was the last coalition stronghold on the planet. It sat on a rocky hill surrounded by burnt jungle, protected by walls of steel and shields of energy. Inside those walls, the remaining coalition forces waited for the end. Eth stood on the command platform and looked at the enemy army below. The Harrow had gathered in the valley, thousands upon thousands of machines, their red eyes glowing in the darkness like stars fallen to earth. More arrived every hour. Soon they would attack, and when they did, Firebase Omega would fall. The coalition forces were broken. Of the 300 who had landed with Eth, only 92 remained. The human company had been reduced to 31 soldiers. Supplies were running low. Ammunition was almost gone. The shields would fail within days. But the humans refused to give up. Eth had watched them for 3 weeks now. He had seen things that should have been impossible, things that changed the way he understood war. He remembered the canyon. 5 days ago, a massive harrow column had been moving through a narrow passage in the mountains. The only way to stop them was to collapse the canyon walls, but there was no time to set up a remote detonation. Someone would have to trigger the explosives manually from inside the blast zone. 3 human engineers had volunteered. They knew they would probably die. Eth saw the fear in their eyes when they said goodbye to their friends. They went anyway. The explosion was enormous. It buried the entire harrow column under millions of tons of rock. When the rescue team finally reached the canyon, they found 2 of the engineers alive, trapped in a small pocket of air beneath the rubble. They were laughing. Eth did not understand how anyone could laugh at such a moment. He asked one of them, a young man with a broken arm and blood on his face, why he was happy. Happy, the man had said. I'm not happy, I'm terrified. I thought I was going to die alone in the dark. Then why do you laugh? The man's smile had faded, replaced by something deeper and more serious. Because we won, Commander. Because those machines are buried under a mountain. Because maybe, just maybe, our friends will live a little longer because of what we did. He had closed his eyes. That is worth being scared for. Eth remembered the sniper. Her name was Maria Santos. She was small even by human standards, with dark eyes and steady hands. When the Harrow had tried to cut off the coalition evacuation route, she had volunteered to hold a position alone. For 72 hours she stayed in that position. No sleep, no food, no support. Just her rifle and her fear and her determination to give her people time to escape. When warriors finally reached her, she could barely stand. Her eyes were red and unfocused. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold her weapon. But she was still firing, still fighting, still holding the line. How, Eth had asked her, how did you do this? Santos had looked at him with those exhausted, haunted eyes. Every time I wanted to quit, she whispered, I thought about the people I was protecting. I thought about my family back on Earth. I thought about my friends in the company. She paused. The fear never stopped. It was there every second telling me to run, telling me I was going to die. But every time I listened to it, I remembered why I was there. And I chose to stay. She had collapsed then, finally allowing herself to rest. Eth had carried her back to base himself. Now, standing on the command platform, Eth understood something he had never understood before. The Harrow were smart. Their artificial minds could calculate every variable, predict every outcome, plan for every scenario. They had destroyed species far older and more powerful than humans. Their algorithms could model any enemy. But they could not model the humans. Because the humans did not make sense. Eth had seen the Harrow's confusion in battle after battle. The machines expected enemies to retreat when outnumbered. The humans did not retreat. The machines expected enemies to surrender when wounded. The humans kept fighting. The machines expected enemies to protect themselves, to value their own survival above all else. The humans valued each other more than they valued themselves. And that broke every calculation the Harrow could make. Lieutenant appeared beside him. She was thinner now, worn down by weeks of fighting. There were new scars on her face and new shadows in her eyes, but she still stood straight. She still smiled. Final count, she said. 31 humans, 92, 12 support staff against. She looked at the army below. I stopped counting at 10,000. The odds are not good, Eth said. The odds have never been good, leaned against the railing. Do you know what my grandfather used to say? He fought in a war on Earth a long time ago. He said that humans have never won a battle because the odds were in their favor. We win because we are too stubborn to lose. Stubborn, Eth repeated. Is that what you call it? That's the polite word. She grinned. The real word involves body parts and activities I probably shouldn't describe. Despite everything, Eth felt something strange. It took him a moment to recognize it as amusement. He was learning human expressions. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you told me about fear. And I think," he paused, searching for words, "I think I am starting to understand. When I watch your soldiers fight, when I see them choose death over retreat, I feel something. A tightness in my chest, a racing in my hearts, thoughts of what might happen, of who might die." He turned to face her. "I think I am learning to be afraid." Studied him for a long moment. "How does it feel?" "Terrible," he admitted. "I do not like it. Every instinct I have tells me to make it stop, to push it away, to be the warrior I was trained to be. But I am also starting to understand why your people fight the way you do." He looked back at the Harrow army. "When I did not feel fear, I fought because it was my purpose. Now, when I feel afraid for my soldiers, when I think about losing them, I want to fight harder, not for duty, for them." Nodded slowly. "That's it, Commander, that is exactly it. Fear shows us what we love, and when we know what we love, we know what is worth fighting for." An alarm sounded across the base. The Harrow were moving. Eth straightened. Below, the machines began their advance, a tide of metal and death rolling toward Firebase Omega. This would be the final battle. They all knew it. "Lieutenant," he said, "I want your soldiers fighting beside mine, not behind, beside." Smiled, "Thought you'd never ask." She turned and ran toward her company, shouting orders. Eth watched her go, then looked at his own warriors. They were gathering at the walls, preparing for the assault. He felt the fear growing in his chest, cold and sharp. For the first time in his life, he let it stay. He did not push it away. Instead, he turned it into something else. He turned it into determination. He roared, "Today we fight beside humans. Today we learn what true courage means." His warriors responded with a battle cry. And beside them, smaller but no less fierce, the humans raised their voices too. The Harrow came, and the coalition stood ready to meet them. Fighting next to humans, I felt fear in a way I never had before. Part 5: The Breaking Point. The battle for Firebase Omega lasted 3 days. On the first day, the Harrow threw their main force against the walls. Wave after wave of machines crashed against the coalition defenses. The shields held, but barely. Soldiers fought and died and were replaced by others who fought and died in turn. By nightfall, the base was surrounded, every escape route cut off. On the second day, the shields failed. The Harrow poured through the gaps, and the fighting moved to the streets inside the base. Eth fought beside his warriors and beside the humans, cutting down enemies with all 4 arms. He watched soldiers fall on both sides, and human alike, and felt the pain of each loss like a blade in his chest. This was fear. This was what humans felt every time they went to war. And now, finally, he understood why they fought so hard. Because losing someone you cared about hurt worse than dying. On the third day, they received the signal. A coalition fleet had arrived in orbit. Reinforcements were coming. But first, they needed to destroy the Harrow command node, the central intelligence that controlled all the machines on Meridian 7. Without it, the Harrow would become disorganized, easy targets for the incoming forces. The command node was located in a bunker 2 kilometers outside the base. Between Firebase Omega and that bunker lay the entire Harrow army. "We need a strike team," Admiral Orr said over the communication system. His voice was tired but determined. "Someone to break through and destroy the node while we hold the base." "I will go," Eth said immediately. "So will I," Lieutenant added. They gathered the strongest soldiers who could still fight, 20 warriors and 8 humans. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But they went anyway. The journey to the bunker was a nightmare. The Harrow knew they were coming and threw everything at them. Soldiers fell with every step. By the time they reached the bunker entrance, only Eth and remained. 2 soldiers against an army. The others bought us time, said. Her voice was steady, but Eth could see her hands shaking. We need to make it count. We will, Eth replied, whatever happens. They entered the bunker. Inside it was dark and cold, filled with the hum of machines. Red lights blinked everywhere, and the walls were covered with cables that pulsed with data. The Harrow command node was deep inside, protected by the last of its defenders. They fought their way through corridor after corridor. Eth took wounds that would have once made him retreat. A blade cut through his armor and into his side. A blast burned away the flesh on one of his arms, but he kept moving. He thought of words about fear, about choosing to fight anyway. He was afraid. He was more afraid than he had ever been in his life. And he had never fought harder. Was wounded too. She was bleeding from a dozen cuts and one of her legs was barely working. But she never stopped, never slowed down. Every time she fell, she got back up. Every time she screamed in pain, she turned that scream into a battle cry. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The Harrow command node was a massive machine, a sphere of metal and light that hummed with terrible intelligence. Around it stood the last of its guardians, 50 Harrow soldiers, armed and ready. Eth stood at the entrance, looking at the impossible odds. We can't win this, said quietly. You know that, right? Yes. We're going to die in this room. Probably. Looked at him. Her face was pale from blood loss, her eyes were bright with pain and exhaustion. But beneath all of that, beneath the fear and the doubt, there was something else. There was fire. I'm scared, she said simply. I'm so scared I can barely breathe. Eth nodded, so am I. For a moment they just looked at each other. 2 soldiers, one human and one alien, standing at the end of everything. They had started as strangers. They had become something more. Smiled. It was the same smile she had worn when they first met, that strange expression that had made him so uncomfortable. But now he understood what it meant. It was not confidence or madness or denial. It was acceptance. Acceptance of fear, acceptance of death, acceptance that some things were worth dying for. Good, she said. Then let's show them what the scared ones can do. They charged. The battle was chaos. Eth moved faster than he had ever moved before, his 4 arms spinning blades and firing weapons in every direction. He felt the fear in his chest, cold and sharp, and he used it. He let it fuel his movements, sharpen his senses, push him beyond every limit he had ever known. Fought beside him, small and fragile and absolutely unstoppable. She took wounds that should have killed her and kept fighting. She screamed and cried and bled, and she never stopped moving forward. One by one, the Harrow fell. But there were too many of them. Eth felt his strength failing. He took a blow that knocked him to the ground. He tried to rise and could not. This was the end. Then was there, standing over him, firing at the remaining Harrow with the last of her ammunition. Get up, she said through gritted teeth. Get up, Commander, we're not done yet. He looked at her, this small, fragile human who should have died 100 times, this creature of flesh and blood who had taught him what courage truly meant. He got up. Together they pushed forward. Together they reached the command node, pulled out an explosive device, the same kind her engineers had used in the canyon. Manual detonation, she said, only way to make sure. Eth understood. If they triggered the bomb, they would die with the node. There was no escape. I will do it, he said. No, shook her head. I'm already dying, Commander. I can feel it. But you need to live. You need to go back and tell them what happened here. Tell them what we did. Tell them that humans were scared. She pressed the device into his hands. Tell them we were terrified every moment, every second, and tell them we fought anyway. She pushed him toward the door. Tell them that's what it means to be brave. The last Harrow soldier attacked, threw herself at it, wrapping her arms around its body, holding it back. "Now," she screamed, "do it now." Eth ran. He ran through the corridors, through the darkness, through the pain. Behind him, he heard the explosion. He felt the heat on his back. He felt the shockwave throw him forward out of the bunker into the open air. And then everything went dark. When he woke up, he was on a Coalition medical ship. The battle for Meridian 7 was over. The Harrow had been defeated, their forces scattered without the command node to guide them. The Coalition had won. Eth asked about. They told him she had not survived the explosion. Neither had any of the other soldiers who had joined the strike team. 28 warriors had died so that the rest could live. Eth stood at the observation window and looked down at Meridian 7. The planet was green again, free from the Harrow. Thousands of Coalition soldiers had survived because of what had happened in that bunker. He thought about her smile, her courage, her fear. He thought about what it meant to be brave. 6 months later, Eth received new orders. The Harrow were massing for a counteroffensive on another world. The Coalition was sending its best forces to meet them. And there was a message from the human command. Captain's replacement, a young officer named, had specifically requested Eth's battalion. The message read, "Ready for another round, Commander. I hear this one's going to be worse." Eth smiled, a human expression he had learned from a friend. He wrote back, "I'm afraid I will see you there." He looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy full of enemies and allies and everything in between. He was afraid. He would always be afraid now. And that was exactly what made him strong.